I'm Dom Nicholls, and this is Ukraine the Latest. Today, as NATO defence ministers meet in Brussels with the US representative to NATO warning Russia of consequences if the Kremlin doesn't move towards a peace agreement, we report how Mexican and Colombian drug cartels have infiltrated the Ukrainian military to learn how to fly kamikaze drones. Plus, we take a deep dive into the current political crisis in France and examine what impact it could have on the war.
Bravery takes you through the most unimaginable hardships to finally reward you with victory.
Russia does not want peace.
Mit unserer Hilfe für die Ukraine auch unsere Freiheit und unsere europäischen Werte.
If I'm president, I will have that war settled in one day, 24 hours.
We are with you, not just today or tomorrow, but for 100 years.
Nous ne pouvons pas, comme Européens, laisser gagner la Russie en Ukraine.
Nobody's going to break us. We are strong. We are Ukrainians.
It's Wednesday, the 15th of October, 3 years and 235 days since the full-scale invasion began. And today I'm joined by my co-host, Adélie Pojzman-Pontay, and foreign reporter, Colin Freeman. I started with a look at what's happening today in Brussels. NATO ministers of defence are meeting at NATO headquarters today. They're meeting now for the Ramstein meeting and a Ukraine-NATO Council meeting. The NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte is there. Denis Shmyhal, Ukraine's defence minister, is also participating, as is Kaja Kallas, the EU's High Representative. So Britain's Defence Secretary John Healey and Germany's Defence Minister Boris Pistorius, they're co-hosting the Ukraine Defence Contact Group, the Ramstein Group, as it's better known. And there's going to be over 50 nations attending today, including, importantly and interestingly, I think, Pete Hegseth, US Secretary of Defence. So John Healey is going to confirm that £600 million has been invested by the UK this year to accelerate drone delivery for Ukraine, with over 85,000 military drones delivered by Britain to Ukraine just in the last 6 months. He's also going to announce an extension to the end of this year of the UK's commitment to NATO's Operation Eastern Sentry. That's the air policing mission. I'm trying to find costings of that. Be interesting to see how much that is all costing and whether or not it would have been cheaper to spend the money on weapons directly. But anyway, that's a story for another day. Also, interestingly, something else I'm chasing up. The MOD press release that I got out ahead of the meeting today also had this rather intriguing line. It said there's going to be an upcoming deployment of British military counter-drone experts to Moldova. That's going to be confirmed today. Apparently, they're going to help train Moldova's armed forces in counter-drone tactics. I dug into this with help from civil servants over in the MOD. A team of British experts, both military and civil servants, are going to be sent out to Moldova to scope what the requirement may be, whether or not it's just providing equipment, capability, or actually training as well. I'm led to believe that these discussions have been going on for a while, and that visit's going to take place later this month, so in the next couple of weeks. Anyway, back to Brussels today, and Mark Rutte, NATO Secretary-General, he's made his doorstep comments. He said one of the things we'll be discussing is this new programme. This is the PEARL, the Prioritised Ukraine Resources List. I think is that what it stands for? Yeah, I'll find out in a sec. Anyway, one of the things that we'll be discussing is the new programme, which we launched in August, the programme where the United States is again delivering essential lethal and non-lethal military support to Ukraine, paid for by allies. He said already $2 billion has been committed. He says, I have every reason to assume today that many other countries will sign up. Now, speaking on that, Finnish Defence Minister announced when he was going into the meetings that Finland is going to be joining the PEARL. He also said that in the next few days, Finland will announce a package of military aid for Ukraine. I'm having a big love for Finland at the moment. I'm being inducted by their embassy here into the London Diplomatic Sauna Society on Thursday night. I'm sure there'll be a very boring story out of that, which we can talk about on Friday. Anyway, US Ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, said that he expects NATO allies today to announce big spending pledges for Ukraine in terms of weapon purchases. When he was speaking yesterday, he said the PEARL mechanism is operating smoothly and efficiently. And he said, right now, we're expecting our European allies to continue to buy weapons. And there will be some big announcements, I expect, tomorrow, as in today's meeting. He said, now it's time for our NATO allies to step up and really operationalise their commitment to Ukraine and the defence of Ukraine in order to create a scenario where we can get a peace deal. So this was yesterday, but I thought this was a really interesting line here. He said, tomorrow, the US will make an important announcement regarding arms supplies to Ukraine. There are almost, and I don't want to say unlimited possibilities, but certainly there are many consequences for not reaching a peace agreement that could be used against the Russians. Some of the things I haven't even mentioned, he, meaning Donald Trump, is potentially considering doing. So we'll watch out for today, possibly showing a bit of ankle there about tomahawks. But we shall see from Mr. Whitaker. I met him briefly in Estonia when I went over for the defence conference there, so we shall hear. Anyway, the timings today, 2 p.m. London time, so in 40 minutes' time, we should get opening statements from Britain's Defence Secretary and Boris Pistorius, Prime Minister Schmihal, Pete Hegseth and the Secretary-General. That's going to be live streamed on NATO's website. We'll put the link in the episode notes, but you'll be able to find it. Just Google NATO. You'll find it. I'm sure you can. Then at 4:40 p.m, so in about 3.5 hours' time, they'll be live streaming the post-Ramstein meeting press conference. So that's before the defence ministers or NATO-Ukraine meeting takes place, but there'll be a live stream of the Ramstein press conference. Now then, on the ground, no big moves in Ukraine in the last 24 hours, but there are three things I want to bring to your attention from the military sphere. First, authorities in Kharkiv Oblast have expanded the mandatory evacuation zone for families with children in the Kupiansk district amid the ongoing intensified Russian assault there. Regional Governor Oleh Shibinov said that this affects 40 settlements across the area. He said it's going to be 409 families going to be relocated to safer areas with over 600 children involved. He said the decision comes in response to the deteriorating security situation near Kupiansk. As we've been reporting, it's been under extreme pressure in the last few weeks. The town was closed on September the 28th to restrict movement, but now greater evacuations are taking place. Second thing I need to bring you. So the open source intelligence site Knoll reports, citing Russian Telegram channels, say that Russian sources have confirmed the loss of Olesivka. That's in Sumy region, about 20 kilometers north of Sumy city, a few kilometers west of Yanikivka that we spoke about yesterday. So they're reporting that Ukrainian forces are already in the centre of the town there and control the southern part. They say attempts to bring in Russian reserves are failing, and most units are taking heavy losses before getting anywhere near the front to try and stabilise the situation. A number of Russian channels are saying that Oleksivka is going to have to be abandoned in the next few days, so we'll keep a close eye on that. And the third thing I need to bring you from the front, there are reports of an uptick in the Russian use of armoured vehicles recently in the Donbass. However, I spoke yesterday to a Western official who sort of poured cold water on that and said, while there may have been more vehicles used recently, they certainly haven't led to any breakthrough. It's likely that they are just, this is my view now, not the Western official, likely that Russia is trying just to gain ground, possibly take Pokrovsk. We know they've been after that for months, for years, trying to make some gains before the ground all turns to mud. It's also almost certainly an acknowledgement that the main method of attack in recent months, that just charging forward on foot or motorbike in small groups, has not been very effective and will itself be impacted to a much greater degree by the change in the weather. In the last few days, there's been quite poor weather in the east of Ukraine, a lot of fog and rain, which makes drone operations very difficult. So if Ukraine is not able to put drones up, it might present an opportunity for armour to get through. That might have been the Russian thinking, but it doesn't seem to have worked. Ukraine's first Azov Army Corps said on Monday that Russian forces had tried to conduct a reinforced company-sized mechanised assault in the vicinity of Dobropea. That's where they pushed north for a few kilometres, that area that's been sliced up over the last few weeks. They say 16 tanks and armoured vehicles and an unspecified number of motorcycles were used. Electronic warfare was employed to try to overwhelm Ukrainian defences. And as I say, the weather's not been so good for drone operations. However, the Russian forces have not been using combined arms. They're not well rehearsed. They don't know how to knit together armour with infantry, with artillery and all the rest of it, because they've used up their regular army. They're now relying on people who have had about 2 weeks training. So, colour me shocked, they haven't got anywhere fast, basically. The first Azov Army Corps say they destroyed 13 armoured vehicles, including 3 tanks, as well as 3 motorcycles involved in that attack. That reporting comes from the Institute for the Study of War. So I think this is Russia just reverting to old methods without any new ideas, without any new training, without any new equipment. I'm not sure why they would expect a different result. The clue as to why they might expect a different result came in comments yesterday from the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, who said that Russia is ready for a peaceful settlement to the war, but is continuing the war due to a, quote, lack of alternatives. That's always a good reason to go to war. Lack of alternative, ideas. It's just seeing Russia continue to throw men at Ukrainian lines with predictable results, as I say. Now then, Ukraine's General Staff said this morning that 16 fuel tanks have been damaged at the Morskoy Naftchynoy terminal in Feodosia in Crimea. Remember, we talked about that strike on Sunday night, the second such strike last week. So that oil terminal is still burning, we are told today. Flames visible from 25 kilometres away, local media is reporting. Ukraine's General Staff said a large-scale fire is ongoing on the territory of the enterprise. Bit of an understatement, I think. They added that in the same overnight operation last Sunday, Ukrainian Defence Forces also targeted a radar system elsewhere in occupied Crimea, a drone command post in Kherson Oblast, and an ammunition depot in Donetsk Oblast. Now let's go a report from Russia. Earlier this morning, Russia had to shut the airports at Ufa and Nizhnekamsk. They are thousands of kilometres east of Ukraine. The latter being near the Yelabuga drone assembly plant in Tatarstan. That is 750 kilometres east of Moscow. That's a long way away. But I mention it because that one, the Yelabuga drone assembly plant in particular, that is a prime target for any Tomahawks that might be gifted and lurking. A few of them would stop Shahed production from that site. That's the prime site for producing Shaheds. A few of them would knock it out for months at a time, I would imagine. You'll remember Russia is now producing its own Shaheds. Well, they've basically got the blueprints from Iran, but most Shaheds now, which they're calling Giran, is produced in Russia. So if you hit that plant, that would severely dent their ability to launch drones. On the subject of launching drones, 27 of 113 got through Ukrainian air defences last night, killed at least 7 people and 29 others injured in attacks across the country, mostly in the north and the centre, although 3 were killed in Kherson region. And just on that, you may remember yesterday we reported on the Russian drone strike on what was very clearly marked, very obviously marked. It was marked a UN convoy earlier yesterday. Now that story has finally made it onto the main UN news site, although I note it is still below the one pushing the new era in fusion energy. But Kyle Glenn, who's at the Centre for Information Resilience, has been doing a bit looking into this. He points us to a report on Telegram, which I had a look at myself and did some translation with colleagues here. So on the channel that calls itself From Mariupol to the Carpathians, they say yesterday morning the enemy tried to enter in a convoy in the Nikolaev-Kherson region through the village of Belozerka. Reconnaissance revealed in time the movement of dual-use equipment, and within minutes crews of first-person view drones of the Dnieper grouping were working along the convoy. As soon as the lead and trailing vehicles were hit, the artillery of the 18th operational grouping, Dnieper, began to work. The enemy suffered losses in manpower and materiel. Later, teams of crews hit several evacuation groups. Any movement of vehicles will be considered a legitimate purpose. All critical infrastructure is a legitimate target. Civilians should be extremely attentive and careful, limit your movement, and leave this area if possible. Okay, that is from, we don't know who this individual is, but I look to Russian authorities to distance themselves from this words, when they are clearly, obviously striking a UN and World Food Programme vehicles. And they include those shots on this Telegram channel. They do include the images from the drone strikes where you can clearly see it says UN on the vehicles. So, I don't know why more is not made of it in the UN. Putting it on the news site as the second story, I don't think it's good enough. But anyway, I bring it to you because I spotted that, and thank you to Carl for helping me out with that Telegram channel. Anyway, that's it from the military update. Adélie, you've been looking at diplomatic updates. There's quite a bit going on, and then we need to talk about France. But first of all, what have you been looking at more generally on the political updates?
Okay, so I will be quite quick on the daily updates today because we have a lot to get through and come back to the main stories tomorrow. Also because we want to zoom in on the political crisis happening in France across the channel. So just on the daily updates, Suspilne, Ukraine's national broadcaster, reports that Zelensky has stripped the mayor of Odessa, that's Gennady Trukhanov, of his Ukrainian citizenship. For years, there have been allegations that he had a Russian passport, and that decision has been made at the presidential level, and it effectively ousts him from his post. A new mayor of Odessa has been nominated this morning. His name is Cedric Lisak, I believe. In early October, there was a petition that demanded Trukhanov's removal. It was not really tied to his Russian passport, but it was in the midst of floods that had killed 10 people in Odessa. And that petition had gathered 25,000 signatures in under a day. So clearly someone who is kind of the target of a lot of anger and who was coalescing a lot of the local anger and of the running of the city. So it's kind of unclear whether that has been linked to the denaturalization of Ukraine citizenship, but clearly there's something going on there in between at the local scale and on the national presidential scale. The former mayor, Trukhanov, has said he would appeal the decision and potentially go all the way to the European Court of Human Rights to appeal it. Ukraine's security service has also denaturalized two other people, an ex-MP, Oleg Tsaryov, and ballet dancer Sergei Polunin. Polunin and Tsaryov have both been living in Russia, and both have publicly supported Russia's war against Ukraine, which Trukhanov, Odessa's former mayor, hasn't. Obviously, he lives in Ukraine as the former mayor of Odessa. That's for the first bit. Moving northward to Estonia, where the Office of the Prosecutor General is implementing hefty penalties for those who are supporting Russia and its war. In 2022, there was a cryptocurrency investor who made 3 separate donations through cryptocurrency, through Bitcoin, to an organization that helps and equips Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Now, this investor has claimed that he does not support and is actually against Russia's war in Ukraine, which seems a bit odd if you're sending money to an organization that equips Russian soldiers. But because the value of cryptocurrency fluctuates, it's been hard to estimate the overall value of the donations. But the Estonian news have agreed that it is estimated at about 54 euros, so not a very important donation. Like, you're not going to sustain the entire Russian army, let alone a platoon with 54 euros. At least I don't believe so. But that has come under the attention of the Estonian Internal Security Service. There's been a plea agreement that has been made, and for these 54 euros sent to Russian soldiers, the crypto investor has agreed to pay a Ukrainian aid organization 30 times the sum. That is about 1,600 euros. And also agreed to 75 hours of community service. And I think what's interesting here is less about the amount of money that he donated in the first place, but mostly the crackdown and the gap between the amount of the first donation and the amount of the fine, showing a very clear positioning from Estonia on cracking down on anyone who may be supporting in any sort of way, shape or form, but also with any sort of amount, Russia's war. In Russia, the Federal Security Service has charged an exiled opposition leader, Mikhail Khodorkovsky, and 22 members of the Russian anti-war committee with violent seizure of power and organizing or participating in a terrorist community. The Russian anti-war committee, which was founded after Russia launched the full-scale invasion in February 2022, has described itself as a platform supporting anti-war Russian and promoting solidarity, action and mutual aid for people who oppose the war unleashed by the Kremlin. So according to the FSB, the committee's goal is the violent seizure of power and a change in the constitutional order of Russia. They've also allegedly accused the group of allegedly financing Ukrainian paramilitary units and of recruiting fighters for them. But it's not provided any evidence in order to support these claims. Now, defense ministers are meeting today in Brussels, all the defense ministers of NATO are meeting in Brussels today in order to show a united front in favor of Ukraine. Some nations have announced new military aid packages for Ukraine as well. That's ahead of the Ukraine Contact Group meeting. Dutch Defense Minister a few days ago, Ruben Brekelmans, was in Odessa and he pledged 200 million euros of support for Ukraine. And today he's promised another 90 million euros. He said these funds will be directed to the production of reconnaissance and strike drones. Meanwhile, there's a NATO member that has, well, not the defense minister, the foreign minister, Hungary's foreign minister Szijjártó, has decided to go on a little trip to Moscow, just, Hungary's position, as we've talked about many, many times in this podcast. Although it is a EU member and a NATO member, is very, very close to Russia and is very interested in enabling Russia in its war, as well as blocking any form of support to Ukraine from the EU. Well, their foreign minister, Szijjártó, has turned up for Russian Energy Week in Moscow, where he was greeted by Deputy Prime Minister Alexander Novak. And Dom, I think you added something to my lists about the German Foreign Office, which has tweeted that they are increasingly feeling Russia's hybrid threat all across Europe. Drones over airports, sabotage in the Baltic Sea, airspace violations, and NATO's eastern flank. And they said that they were responding calmly but resolutely. And that's it for the main daily updates.
Now, we need to talk about France. It is a big story anyway, but it is related to Ukraine. There's political turmoil there again. Mr. Lecornu, former defence minister, is back as prime minister. He lasted, 16 days last time? But he's back as prime minister now. I mean, we don't mean to be too flippant about this, but this could be the end of President Macron, who's a stalwart supporter, but occasionally sort of dragging his heels, perhaps, but a supporter of Ukraine. But Adélie, I detect a slight accent. I think you might know a little bit more about French politics than I do. So why is it important that we pay attention, if only briefly, to the chaos in France? And what impact does it have for the war in Ukraine?
Okay, thank you, Dom. So let's recap a little bit how we got there, because I think it's important here to have the big picture as well as what's happened over the last 10 days in order to understand what could potentially be at stake, whether that's under Macron's presidency or what is left of it, or what happens later on in Ukraine. So really, this whole chaos started last summer when Macron called for snap parliamentary elections. Presidents rarely disrupt the electoral cycle, which is set at regular intervals, unlike in the British system. And when they have disrupted it, it's always led to chaos. This time, it's led to something that is unprecedented in French politics, a hung parliament, 3 ways, which is stuck between Marine Le Pen's far-right party, which came first, a left-wing coalition, which came second, and then Macron's centrist bloc, which came third. And that is quite stressful because usually in France, the parliament has a heavy majority in favor of the president, which enables the president to carry out the program and the platform on which they've ran. The traditional right-wing party coming out of the elections last year, Les Républicains, came out of the election with an abysmal score that's around 6%. And that is going to be important for what happened in the last couple of weeks. This hung parliament has led the country in an absolute, and I'm going to try to say it the British way, cul-de-sac. Mm-hmm. Is that how you say it?
Yeah.
Okay, un cul-de-sac, whereby the left and the far right could basically veto any law and the government, and especially the budget. As a result, governing the country has been impossible, and there have been 5 prime ministers in 1 year. That is actually now 6 if you count Lecornu again, since he's made a comeback in the last week. So that's for the general picture. Let's zoom in on the last 2 weeks, and I'm going to try and spare you most of the detail of this little opera that has been going on. Lecornu was nominated prime minister by Macron earlier in September, and he started negotiating with the different parties in order to form a government. The government was announced on Sunday night. By 9:45 the following morning, it had already collapsed, and Lecornu was turning in his resignation after just 14 hours. Macron was seen dramatically pacing up and down the Quai de Seine in Paris, very forlornly, like some godforsaken Greek hero in a tragedy of his own making. And France has been waiting for the entire week with bated breath to find out who he would name as the new prime minister, that's now Lecornu, trying to bring together yet again a government that will last maybe until Christmas, who knows? Which brings us to Ukraine. Now, there's an argument for saying that a lot of what France does in relation to Ukraine is being orchestrated at the presidential level and at the European level, so that carries on as usual. But political instability isn't good for anyone. Firstly, the vacuum left by Le Cornu's first government opened all possibilities at the beginning of the week. Would Macron enter negotiations with the far right? Would he call for another parliamentary election? Would he resign? Either of these last two scenarios would be likely to lead to Marine Le Pen's national rally winning, and I'll come back to why that's complicated for Ukraine. But in the meantime, the black hole of political instability, if you will, has engulfed all of the other topics, including Ukraine, which does not even make it on the radar of politicians, the parliament, the ministers at this stage. And although France has been at the helm of the coalition of the willing with the UK, there's not that much to show for it at the moment because it all relies, as we know, on the prospect of a ceasefire, which, as we've mentioned several times on this podcast, is nowhere to be seen on the horizon just now. That leaves France in a bit of a pickle, where the coalition of the willing provides big ideas and a new framework for peace in Europe. It doesn't really provide a clear pathway on how to achieve it. In the meantime, France's support to Ukraine happens a lot at the European level through maintaining the weapons and kit it has sent to Ukraine and through training programs like EUMAM, Military Assistance Mission. France has been instrumental in driving recent European geopolitical advances, shaping much of the thinking of defence and industrial policy priorities in Brussels. But also fair to say that the protracted political crisis since 2024 has dented France's ability to set the political agenda in Brussels. A parliamentary report on Ukraine aid from last month estimated the amount of French aid between February 2022 until the end of 2024 at 5.9 billion euros, plus 400 million euros in the bilateral support fund for Ukraine. France doesn't participate in the Pearl initiative, for example, which provides concrete military support and weapons for Ukraine. And if so far, Macron has committed to more money on defense and more military spending until 2030, it is for its own armed forces and deterrence forces. In March this year, President Macron announced an extra 2 billion euros for Ukraine, which a source of mine has been skeptical of, pointing to no real weapons delivery since 2025. But considering the budget restrictions in France at the moment, the real question remains, where is this money coming from? What will be sustainable and implementable in the long run for Ukraine?
So go on then, is his baguette flambéed?
You don't flambe a baguette. I guess you could.
Is he toast?
Is he toast? Well, he's not going to run in 2027 because he can't. It's constitutionally impossible. It has been said in numerous circles that was he trying to bring and to provide an entry point to the national rally for the next presidential elections in order for him to come back in 2032 as sort of the savior of France. That would be a bit of a mad strategy. He's always said he would not resign, and he's not given any signal so far of resigning before the next presidential election. But you know what? Everything has changed so fast in the last couple of weeks or in the last few months. Who knows what will happen before the end of the year?
And on Ukraine, so Monsieur Le Cornu was quite bullish when he was defence minister. I've not heard him say a huge amount as prime minister because he's been, madly trying to keep the house standing up. But the only other voice that we know of that you could sort of pin a policy position regarding Ukraine to is Marine Le Pen. And it's the other way. It's not supportive at all. So amidst all this chaos, that any of the other people who may get anywhere near power, are they known for a pro or an anti-Ukraine stance? It seems to have slipped off the agenda at all. And I just wonder if it will disappear if Mr. Macron is either no longer there or diverted by political chaos, quite where the momentum is for anything regarding Ukraine.
When it comes to Marine Le Pen, as you've said, her party has been very much Russophiles for a very long time, and that is as ideological as it is financial. Russian banks, and especially a Czech Russian bank in 2014, backed the Front National with a 9.4 million euro loan in order to run for elections. And it is a Moscow-based bank led by a former Russian state banker with connections to the Kremlin, and who's also known for his role in shadow finance. But it also raises the question, why would a Russian bank under scrutiny by Western intelligence circles be willing to finance a European party shunned by all other major French lenders, because domestic banks in France won't touch the Front National or the National Rally. The alignment, as I've said, is as ideological as it is financial. In 2024, the Fondation Jean Jaurès, a study from there, said that National Rally voters were 3 times more likely than average to blame NATO for the war, and nearly half of them agreed with the statement Putin defends traditional values against Western decadence. What is happening at the moment is that Marine Le Pen is banned from running, and the new head of the party, Jordan Bardella, may be changing the party's line on Ukraine, but to what extent, that is still unclear. Le Monde has reported that in a confidential briefing, French diplomats warned that Bardella becoming part of the government or head of government would freeze bilateral military aid within weeks. So that's really important to note. Lately, Le Monde has pointed out that some of these positions are shifting within the party, mostly around one man, that's Pierre Romain Thionnet, who's been deemed an Atlanticist by the party's hardliners. He wants more of a Gaullist line of American alignment against a threat from the East, which is a stark change after decades of anti-Americanism from the French far right. And that is also about the fascination for Trump and what he has in common with Putin, his macho persona in politics, his emphasis on traditional values that has warmed younger generations of far-right voters towards the US. Now, if the National Rally, which is very Eurosceptic, were to come to power in France, it would leave its position open-ended at this stage and with a vast question for us to ponder. Which far-right axis in Europe would it align itself with? Would it be Italy's Giorgia Meloni's on Ukraine, or would it be Hungary's Viktor Orban? And that is for us to ponder and to watch out in the next year or so.
Okay, and just briefly, next thing to look out for then? Amongst all this French chaos, what's the next movement we're expected to see?
Well, the French government holds, I will say.
Oh, right. So no news is good news.
So far, at the moment. Okay. Yeah, they seem to have come to agreements that could make the budget come through by the end of the year. So we'll have to watch that. And I think one thing I want to watch as well is weapons delivery from France in 2025 and seeing what exactly have they delivered to Ukraine in terms of concrete military support before the end of the year.
Yeah.
That's definitely what we'll be looking at.
If anyone from the embassy wants to come and let us know, we're all ears. Now, I'm delighted to be joined by foreign reporter Colin Freeman, who has a story running today saying that Mexican and Colombian drug cartels have infiltrated the Ukrainian military to learn how to fly first-person view kamikaze drones. Colin, welcome back to the pod. What can you tell us about this extraordinary story?
This is reports that Mexican intelligence tipped off their Ukrainian counterparts back in the summer that cocaine cartels in Mexico and possibly also Colombia were sending operatives to join the International Legion, the multinational volunteer force in Ukraine, with the purpose of getting trained in drones so that they could then use the drone techniques, especially armed drones, for use in battles against other cartels in their turf wars and also against members of the Mexican security forces. Now, apparently, the Ukrainian authorities investigated this and possibly as a result of information received by their Mexican counterparts, apparently discovered that there was a particular legionnaire, I think a Mexican guy, operating under the name of Aguila 7, which I think translates as Eagle 7, who had been at several drone pilot training schools in Ukraine and was actually noted as being a rather promising student. But it appeared that he had joined the Legion under an alias and was there largely just to learn techniques that he could then bring back and disseminate to members of his cartel back home. Apparently, they also found 3 ex-members of the Colombian FARC paramilitary group there as well. And this appears to be a relatively isolated case, but there are a couple of slightly worrying background factors to this. One is that the Legion now has quite a few Latin American volunteers serving there. The vast majority, it should be said, there for legitimate reasons, but that does mean to say that it's easier for bandits and other miscreants to perhaps blend in under their cover. And the other issue, of course, is that it suggests that some of the drone techniques being pioneered in Ukraine are likely to end up finding their way into criminal hands elsewhere, and possibly not just in Mexico, although Mexico is very much a case in point at the moment. In the last few years they've been experimenting with use of drones, initially for apparently transporting contraband and doing surveillance, keeping an eye out for incoming members of the security forces, but increasingly also for using the armed drones. And just last week, apparently, there was social media footage emerged in Mexico of a cartel unit using a drone equipped with a fiber optic cable, the sort that we've seen recently in Ukraine. And what that suggests is that they very much see Ukraine as being the kind of the petri dish for all the various techniques with armed drones that they can then bring back to use in their drug wars in Mexico and elsewhere. And we have seen armed drones being used quite a bit in Mexico already, killing a number of people, including the FPV ones.
Yeah, now you've spent a lot of time very close, right up at the front line in Ukraine. You spent a lot of time with the Legion. I mean, is it a case that they just simply can't vet people to the degree required to find out if they've got ulterior motives for joining? Is it feasible they would be able to do these kind of checks in the middle of the war, or do you think there's more that Ukraine could be doing to try and work out who these people are and what their motivations are? Because as you say, a lot of people do come from Latin America and elsewhere around the world to join the International Legion, so it must be extremely hard to try and find these guys when they're first turning up.
Well, yeah, I've just written a book about the Legion, which I'll briefly plug, The Mad and the Brave. One of the features in that book is the lack of proper vetting in the Legion. It's been a problem right from the start. And while the vast majority of legionnaires are decent people, there are a few bad apples creeping. And this is partly because of data protection laws, actually. If you, say, try to check whether a British legionnaire, would-be legionnaire, has a criminal background these days or a background of poor mental health or other reasons why you wouldn't want them there, it's actually quite hard to check because data protection rules mean that you can't just ring up from Ukraine and ask the police to disclose criminal records or anything like that. It's only if stuff like that is already in the public domain. I think it's very much the same for people from Mexico as well, if not even more so. The Legion has limited vetting capacity anyway, and I think in this particular case, the individual or individuals concerned had come in on falsified passport documents and so on. And I think with the best will in the world, it's often difficult for any country, especially in a war zone, to check whether those documents are verified or not. So it has been a problem. And more generally, there has been a problem with the Legion attracting people with criminal records as well, although this is clearly more extreme case where you've got members of a very organised international cartel apparently trying to infiltrate.
Yeah, thanks, Colin. Now, just briefly before you go, because I know you've got to dash off, we'll put a link to your story in the episode notes for today. But I note that you finished by saying that it's not only the difficulty is vetting them when they get into Ukraine, but it's also the countries from which they come. You say that former Colombian soldiers who are reported to be working in Sudan and Yemen, and actually some of them have been accused of taking part in the assassination of the president of Haiti in 2021. You say Colombia is now considering a bill to outlaw soldiers and veterans from the country from enlisting as security personnel and what have you, mercenaries, if you like. But the flip side of that is that if you deny them the opportunity for employment, then it's just going to push them into the arms of the cartel. So, what can the state from which these people come from do to try and curb the flow?
One of the problems Colombia has is that as a dividend of the peace deal that it had with the FARC about 10 years ago, it has something of a surplus of well-trained, US-drilled, combat-hardened members of the security forces who now don't apparently have quite so much work to do as they used to. And one of the reasons they've been coming to Ukraine actually is because they find a demand for their skills there. I think most of them are partly there because they believe in the cause. That's certainly what a lot of them say. But also some of them are there because the money that the Ukrainians are offering, the combat pay, $3,000 a month, is not bad money by Colombian standards. I mean, one person did tell me that among the Colombians who are out in Ukraine are a lot of ex-members of the paramilitary police and so on, who are pretty good at telling dodgy ex-cartel guys when they see them. So that is perhaps one safeguard that we shouldn't overlook. But yeah, it clearly is a concern for any country if you have a surplus of military-trained individuals who are short of work, that can be a recipe for trouble. And quite how Colombia is going to rein that one in, I'm really not sure. I mean, I think they've been sending soldiers to work in countries like the UAE, where they are, at least, if they're guns for hire, they are at least guns for hire working for a recognised government. And again, in Ukraine, they are technically working for a recognised government. But it does leave room, essentially, for mischief on the sidelines.
Blimey, amazing stuff. I mean, paramilitary commanders joining the International Legion to hunt down cartel members. I mean, that's extraordinary stuff. Somebody should write a book on that, you know. Anyway, Colin, thank you so much for today. We'll put the link in the episode notes for today. Thank you so much for joining us, Colin Freeman.
Thanks, Dom. Bye-bye.
Ukraine the Latest is an original podcast from The Telegraph, created by David Nicholls. To support our work and stay on top of all of our Ukraine news, analysis and dispatches from the ground, please subscribe to The Telegraph. You can get 1 month free, then 2 months for just £1 at www.telegraph.co.uk/Ukraine the Latest. Deploying cutting-edge technology, we also release Ukrainian and Russian versions of this podcast. These translations retain our voices and delivery so that it can reach listeners in every region of Ukraine and those parts of Eastern Europe where Russian is still widely spoken. Links to those can be found in the podcast description to this episode. You can also now sign up to the new Ukraine the Latest weekly newsletter. Each week, Francis and I answer your questions, provide recommended reading, and give exclusive analysis and behind-the-scenes insights, plus maps of the front lines and diagrams of weapons to complement our daily reporting. It's free for everyone, including non-subscribers. You can find the link to sign up in the descriptions for this episode. We regularly have a Ukraine live blog on our website where you can follow updates as they come in throughout the day, including insights from regular contributors to this podcast. We also do the same for other breaking international stories. If you appreciate our work, please consider following Ukraine the Latest on your preferred podcast app and leave us a review, as it really helps others find the show. Please also share it with those who may not be aware we exist. You can listen to this conversation live at 1 p.m. London time each weekday on X Spaces. Follow The Telegraph so that you don't miss it. You can also get in touch directly to ask questions or give comments by emailing ukrainepod@telegraph.co.uk. We continue to read every message. You can also contact us directly on X. You'll find our handles in the description for this episode. As ever, we're especially interested to hear where you're listening from around the world. Executive producers are Francis Durnley, Louisa Wells and David Nicholls.
My name is David Nicholls. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.